Okay, welcome to today's webinar in the Alayla webinar series on the future of AI in education and training. I'm Lewis Johnson, the host of the series. And the reason why we've been organizing this series, as you probably know, is we're interested in exploring what AI really has to offer to education. We are seeing that artificial intelligence is beginning to have an impact, not just in the technology, but for a broad range of industries and disciplines, and that includes education. So the question that we've been exploring is, how can AI help education and training? Some people are afraid that AI will be used to put teachers out of jobs. Whereas we see that there's lots of opportunity for AI to help make learning better. It can help learners learn better, and it can help teachers teach better. But today we're interested in looking at the question of whether it can help make education more inclusive, more socially enlightened, and fairer. And to guide us through, to answer this question is today's speaker, Dr. Kaśka Porayska-Pomsta, who is calling in from London. She is Associate Professor of Adaptive Technologies for Learning at the University College London Knowledge Lab. So Kaśka, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you very much. Good morning. And thank you for joining me for this webinar entitled, Can AI Help Us Create More Inclusive Society and Education? And this, along with other questions related to the potential impact of AI on society, is a very pertinent question right now. And that is because AI has now crossed over from a purely scientific domain to real applications used in our everyday lives. And this question is even more important because as the use of AI seems to accelerate in many critical areas of our lives and also social structures, such as in policing, health services, and education, despite its great potential for positive impact, it is also revealing some quite worrying flaws, which not only reinforce the existing inequalities and social inclusion, but they are being now automated. So without spending too much time on this, I just wanted to give you an example of why AI is getting a bad press in the context of social inclusion at the moment. This example comes from policing, which is increasingly relying on AI algorithms to help in human decision-making. So, for example, in the US and also increasingly in Europe, police are now equipped with cameras which use AI algorithms, which are underpinned with AI algorithms. And these cameras can not only record situations in which individual police find themselves, but they can also allow the police to connect on demand to the records, to the police records, for example, to check whether individuals that they apprehend may have a criminal record. And also they can do face recognition on the spot to help, together with the information from the records, to help the police decide what to do, for example, whether to make an arrest. And so this is, in principle, a really great idea and a great application that can help reinforce the law. But there is a problem in that the records and also the face recognition software are known for their errors. And in particular, the fact that actually these both of these sources of information hide inherent biases that come from us, the humans. For example, racial biases, which may actually lead to wrong or unfair decisions by the police. So the support that AI can offer on the basis of such inherently biased data will, by definition, be also skewed. The point that I want to make here is that if we are concerned with social inclusion and justice, we need to be very cautious about how much of our judgment we surrender to AI. And this is because AI lacks access to the nuances of the context that we humans have access to. And at present, it also operates purely on the basis of statistical probabilities rather than involving human moral judgment. And this is obviously problematic if we do surrender all our decision-making to AI. And these problems that we are facing right now with AI both explain some of the anxieties we may be experiencing right now, but also it highlights the importance of our differentiating and remembering that AI is not in fact the same as HI, and that the decisions that AI is able to make may in fact be very different and are in fact very different from those that we would make. But there is also a very positive point to be made about this difference between AI and HI, especially in the context of using AI for nurturing social inclusion. And this is exactly what I want to focus on in this talk. In particular, I will try to illustrate in this talk, as I will try to illustrate in this talk, if it is explicitly acknowledged by us, this difference between AI and us allows us to use AI to create environments which may provide relative safety zones to accommodate and sometimes even erase the differences between us as individuals. For example, they can be used to reduce social anxiety that some of us might experience in human interactions. And that might be particularly useful for helping alleviate conditions or symptoms that are associated with conditions such as autism, for example. They can also be used to provide props for exploring our strengths and weaknesses in a very concrete and repeatable way, which may not have been possible, which wasn't possible to the same extent in human environments. But before I move on to concrete examples, I also want to highlight another important thing that is important to realize about AI in the context of social inclusion. And that is that AI is not just a solution, and it is not useful to actually treat it just as a solution to some well-defined problem, although obviously it can be that too in other contexts, but rather that AI actually provides us with a tool for searching and for articulating important questions about who we are, how we function and learn in a way that is very concrete. And so this is, if you like, the applied philosophy dimension of AI. It also provides us with instruments through which we can attempt to find some of the answers. And this is AI as a methodology. And incidentally, this three-faceted definition of AI represents its original conception as a field of research. And this view, this multifaceted view of AI is potentially very useful because it allows us to see and address inclusion not as some fixed state or some illness for which there is a medicine that we can administer, and this would be the case if we treated AI simply as a solution. But rather that the inclusion is a process of searching and negotiating with ourselves as individuals and as a society. And in this context, in the context of inclusion, the concreteness and the uncompromising bluntness of AI classifications can be very useful because it can provide us with a necessary means for exploring and for self-examining. And it can also act as a medium for communication and for negotiation between us, both of which I will also try to illustrate in the talk today. This interpretation of AI which includes the view of AI as a philosophy, as a methodology, and as a solution, is very useful. It sits very, very well with our current understanding of what is necessary for inclusion to flourish. And what is necessary is first the need to be equipped, our need to be equipped with an ability to understand, regulate, and accept ourselves. And this is research, especially research concerned with metacognitive competencies and critical thinking, tells us that the ability to question and know oneself is instrumental to the formation of self-identity, critical thinking, moral values, and ultimately to individual empowerment. But because these self-understanding skills are very hard for us to get at, we may need props, such as, for example, a virtual mirror, which will help us in developing such skills and abilities. And as I will show in a moment, one of the key affordances of AI is that it can actually act as such a mirror. Second, we need to be willing to entertain other people's perspectives and also to be able to access other people's experiences and perspectives. And here also research tells us that, and especially research in cognitive psychology and cognitive neuroscience tells us that these abilities are critical to developing a sense of justice and social responsibility that provides the foundations for an inclusive society, but also to developing executive functioning, which is important for planning and for strategizing. For both of these needs, the need to self-understand and also the need to be willing to entertain other points of views and to access other people's point of views, I will also provide examples, and I will illustrate how AI can act as a medium. But to foster these three types of abilities, we also need to create an environment, and this is really a critical point. Because this environment creates a stepping stone for self-discovery and for the negotiation with others. And again, in what follows, and in fact, this is going to be the first thing that I look at, I will also try to illustrate this and how AI can act as such a stepping stone. And in order to do this, I will use two examples from my own research. Both of these examples are examples of systems which target social and educational exclusion explicitly. The first example is of a UK-funded project called ECOS. This is the one on the left here, which was concerned with creating an AI environment to support young children with diagnosis of autism spectrum conditions to explore, learn, and practice social communication skills. The second example here on the right is from a large European project called TARDIS, which created an AI coaching environment for young people at risk of social exclusion through unemployment. And the idea here was to help young people to develop self-efficacy, but also specific social interaction and presentation skills in the context of job interviews. And I will explain these systems in more detail as I go through the examples when I illustrate the different affordances of AI. So first, let's explore how AI may be useful in creating a safe environment for self-discovery, exploration, and learning, and especially how it can be used in contexts when the learners are defined in terms of their difference from the so-called norm. And this will look at AI as a stepping stone. Here I will use the example of the ECOS system, which, as I already mentioned, targets young children with diagnosis of autism to explore and exercise social interaction and communication skills. One thing that is really important to realize is that children with autism are often excluded from mainstream education, and as they become adults, they are more often than not excluded from many opportunities that the so-called normal functioning individuals are able to access. And this includes access to further or higher education and employment, which very often this exclusion from education and employment often leads to mental health difficulties and depression. And these conditions affect, these are additional conditions to the conditions which are associated with the autism spectrum condition. They affect not only the individuals with the diagnosis who are quite overtly excluded from the society, but also their carers, their families. So the whole thing has a very wide-ranging impact and long-lasting impact on many individuals who are involved in these kinds of circumstances. Autism is a neurodevelopmental disorder for which there is no cure. It is typically defined in terms of difficulties which are related to social communication and interaction. So these are the ones on the left here. And these relate to difficulties with language, both verbal and nonverbal, and also difficulties with recognizing and understanding other people's emotions and expressing own emotions. It is also characterized by restricted and repetitive behaviors, and the difficulties related to that are to do with adapting to novel environments and difficulties with generalizing to new situations. So these are typically the skills and difficulties which are targeted by the existing interventions, autism interventions, which and with the aim being to improve life chances and quality of life for the individuals who may suffer from or who may experience these difficulties. And one challenge which is increasingly recognized as such by autism activists, as well as increasingly also by clinical and educational practitioners, is that many interventions focus on correcting the deficits. So the emphasis is on the weaknesses rather than on the strengths of the individuals. And this means that rather than the emphasis is on fitting the individual to the environment rather than on creating an environment that will accommodate the difference of those individuals, and which by doing so will alleviate the difficulties that are associated with autism. And apart from being quite ineffective, the existing interventions can also be very stressful for those who are subjected to them. On the other hand, there are alternative approaches to autism intervention, such as the SEARCH framework, which combine best clinical and intervention practices, which propose that in order to support social communication, so this is the first element of the SEARCH, the SC, it is fundamental to address children's emotional regulation. So it really does take emotions and the ability to regulate those emotions as being at the core of people's motivation to communicate in the first place. And in order to do this, it is the framework claims it is necessary to create an appropriate environment which is not based simply on drill and practice of the specific skills, as is the case in many intervention approaches, typical intervention approaches that the autistic children and individuals can access, but which provide adaptive transactional support in which any action by the child may be treated as a potential communicative act, and where no opportunity is lost to support that communicative act. And in the interest of time, I will not go into more detail about SEARCH. If you're interested, here is the main reference. But it is important to highlight that ECHOS is fully based on this approach. As our target group involves children at the lower end of the spectrum, and as our children are often classified as non-verbal, ECHOS employs a large multi-touch screen through which children can act on the environment. And the touch gestures are the main source of information for the system and for the AI agent, which we are employing in ECHOS. Apologies. The touch gestures are the main source of information for the system, as I said, and in line with the CERT's framework, ECHOS provides a unifying theme for the learning activities because this is considered an important element to provide a sense of familiarity as children progress through the activities. These activities can be well-defined and they can have an endpoint, a clear endpoint, or they can be open-ended. And they can also have an element of unpredictability through allowing exploration by the children. And most activities are conducted collaboratively with the agent and can include involvement from a human practitioner. And in fact, in the interactions with the ECHOS, the human practitioner played a quite important role, as will become clear shortly. In the context of in this context, this ECHOS context, AI agent acts as a facilitator and as a partner or peer who responds to children's interactions with the environment and who responds positively in a structured way, which involves initiation of interactions with children and spontaneous reactions, especially if children respond to the agent's initiations in a way that pleases the agent. And I will explain now what underpins the agent, what is the architecture that underpins the agent that allows for the spontaneity to occur. So the agent's actions are aided by the AI planning architecture. This is a typical AI technique which is used to drive AI agents' behaviors, not only virtual but also within robotics. And these kinds of architectures enable AI agents to take autonomous decisions. In this particular architecture, we can also represent the agent's emotional predispositions. For example, its propensity for happiness and positivity, which is very important in the context of the ECHOS environment, because we want to provide positive feedback at every opportunity to encourage motivation and engagement. And these predispositions determine, first of all, the choice of the agent's actions. They also help the agent determine its longer-term plans for what actions to take in the future, given its appraisal of the situation or of the world, which is facilitated through the senses. So in the context of ECHOS, these will be touch gestures performed by the children. And then also it allows the agent to set goals and select coping strategies. And in this case, these will be related to helping children become more used to initiating and responding to bids for interaction. And the role of the agent as a socially credible peer is also aided by its ability to display a wide range of quite complex emotions for the child to explore. This is a screenshot of a tool which, if I were on a different platform, I could actually demonstrate, which can be used to show the complexity of the emotions that the agent is able to display. This is a very important capability which not only motivates the children, but also is really important to as such to allow buy-in from the children of the agent as a credible social partner. It also provides actually an opportunity for exploration by the child, also in collaboration with the human, of the different emotions that people can feel. So this speaks very much to the typical difficulties experienced in autism with recognizing other people's emotions and understanding other people's states of mind. So now that I have given you some idea of the what ECHOS is and what is the basis, both pedagogical and also technological basis for it, the question is it able to provide a safe place or a stepping stone to the children and help them engage in communication? And the answer here is, as always, quite not as straightforward as we would like, because we're dealing actually with a quite complex condition, but it is nevertheless very encouraging, especially if we take as a measure of success the children's frequency of their initiating and responding to bids for interaction, which are the difficulties in communication that are very typically observed in autism. And here we're talking about initiating and responding to bids for interaction to and from humans, as well as to and from the agent. And what is really encouraging is that both the frequency of children's responses, which is shown on the left, and of initiations, it's relatively high. And we have to remember here that the children who interacted with ECHOS, our target group, were characterized as low functioning, and many of these children didn't actually or weren't known as communicative in other contexts, especially in the classroom context. So the outcomes here are quite encouraging, and they have been actually quite surprising to the practitioners. We have significant results, especially when we're looking at increases in children's communicating with the human practitioner who was present during the interactions, children interacting with ECHOS. And this is something that we want to see. I mean, it may be quite counterintuitive for engineers who want AI to provide the main source of communication opportunities, but actually in this context, in the context of autism, we wanted to create an opportunity for children to actually communicate with the humans. So this idea of AI creating an environment which serves as a stepping stone seems to have worked quite well in this context. Now I want to move on to another affordance of AI, as I see it, and that is AI as a mirror. This understanding of AI or view of AI involves AI as a prop for self-understanding. And I will illustrate this with the help of another example, which comes from the TARDIS project, in which focused on developing on an environment, a coaching environment in which young people aged 16 to 24 who are at risk of social exclusion through unemployment could practice their self-presentation and communication skills in job interview context. And the idea here was to help young people to improve their self-efficacy, as I mentioned before, to reduce their anxiety, and also to improve their self-belief and confidence, along with improving their concrete skills such as self-presentation and communication during job interviews. And just to give you a context of why this is an important area of research and intervention, youth unemployment is a growing global problem. For example, in the UK, the first quarter of 2018, youth unemployment rate stood at 11.7%. In the EU as a whole, the youth unemployment stood at 15.6%. So this is for the whole of the European Union. So these numbers are pretty significant, and they are reflected across the world, with some variations depending very much on the political systems and educational systems. There are also other issues. It's not just the numbers. There are other issues which are associated with youth unemployment, and that is that youth unemployment is typically accompanied by a plethora of other challenges. For example, there is often a history of unemployment in families, which can create actually a sense of exclusion from the very, very beginning. This also leads to issues with self-confidence, self-esteem, and also self-perception, and planning ahead and seeing oneself as somebody who can be in employment and actually engage in job interviews and in job search. So there are a lot of emotional issues to deal with and to support as part of addressing the job interview skills more generally. So the socio-economic context in which and for which we design the TARDIS is quite complex. And to give you an idea of how TARDIS worked as a piece of technology, the interaction between learners and TARDIS was facilitated through an off-the-shelf Microsoft Kinect. This was quite important because we were working in real-world context. This was not purely a lab project. And it was also facilitated by a high-quality microphone. These two pieces of equipment collected data, such as specific gestures performed by the user, as well as information about the speech duration and voice quality. And this data provides the necessary input to the system, which allows the system to create a user profile and to conduct assessment of the user's performance in terms of the quality of their verbal and non-verbal behaviors. And these assessments are then passed on to other modules in the system, which are responsible for managing the interaction scenarios and for selecting appropriate questions to ask the user, and also for controlling the AI agents' behaviors. And these AI agents act as virtual recruiters to provide a situated experience to the learner. As in ECHOS, the agents in TARDIS were furnished with a wide range of behaviors with quite a lot of nuance, which was needed to express in a credible way their cognitive and emotional states in their role as recruiters. For example, to express interest or boredom or doubt in order to modulate the interaction and to provide opportunities for for appropriate responses from the users and for an experience of different scenarios. This also provided these nuances in behaviors which were aided by quite complex models which underpinned these agents, provided the basis for creating character personas, and for example, for varying the degree of friendliness and politeness, again, to provide diversity of the job interview scenarios, as well as creating different levels of difficulty. As well as the situated experience, which was facilitated by the interaction with the agents, TARDIS also offered an opportunity for a debrief using an open model of the learner, which displayed the data which was generated about the user's behaviors during their interactions with the agents. This model also displayed the system's interpretations of the data. So the users could see the timeline, they could observe themselves or revisit how they behaved during the interviews. They could also access the behaviors of the agent, and they could also inspect different interpretations of their behaviors. For example, the energy in their gestures or in their voice. These were expandable windows. Using this tool, this tool was actually used as part of the setup of the TARDIS, and was always used at the end of each interaction with the virtual agent to provide the grounding of the experiences and to provide opportunities for self-reflection in a quite an immediate way. And it was a very useful tool which allowed to explore strengths and weaknesses, and also to plan ahead any kind of improvements that were desired. And this tool, it's important to say, was used with human practitioners. In the context of TARDIS, this was in the context of the project as a whole. It was considered a very important aspect that the human practitioners actually also had an opportunity to discuss different behaviors and strategies for improvement, and also access the reasons for why the learners may have behaved in particular ways during the interviews. So in this context, in this project, the goal was very explicitly to provide a very concrete mirror for the learners and a tool for reflection with multimodal data and their interpretation by the system. So again, as with AI as a stepping stone, here the question is, did it have any effect? Did it really act as such a mirror? And to address this question, we looked at outcomes for the learners of using TARDIS in terms of their improvements, in terms of the quality of their interview answers, quality of verbal and non-verbal behaviors, as well as self-reported measures all related to their levels of anxiety, self-efficacy, and quality of their answers. We also compared these outcomes, the outcomes for the learners who used TARDIS, with those of learners who used another system, which was a non-AI, online, interactive system, which is typically used in or recommended in the UK for any preparations for job interviews. And this online system involved examples of interview scenarios and quizzes and recommendations. Our results are quite encouraging, just like with ECHOS. In particular, we saw improvements in the quality of performance on all of the interview questions. Here I included two examples of quite difficult questions, which may be quite threatening to the learners. And we did test this actually with different sensors to look at the anxiety levels that each interview question may have led to. And here we saw significant improvements over time for the TARDIS group and a significant difference between TARDIS and the control group for these particular questions. Similarly, for the specific nonverbal behaviors, especially eye contact, tone of voice, and facial expression, we also saw improvements for the TARDIS group compared to the control group over time. And finally, we also saw improvements for the self-reported measures, which was really encouraging, because this is really about the self-belief that we are looking to improve in the young people. And although both groups, the TARDIS and the control group, improved, we do see the effects of engaging in talking about both the anxiety and also self-efficacy and how young people perceive their performance. So there seems to be quite a lot of value here. The situated experience and the self-reflection, which was facilitated through the open model, seem to encourage young people to think differently, and also they lead to improvements on specific skills. What was really important was that these tools provided the learners with opportunities that they didn't have before, and the self-reports, which are supported through the open learner model, to the learners may also have a positive effect on their self-perception, and whether these effects are long-lasting is something that remains to be seen. But these positive trends at least demonstrate the possibilities in this area if AI is used. But of course, both in ECHOS and in TARDIS, the success of the AI was supported by the humans. They were both they were there to observe and to provide extra communicative and learning support. And as such, in both those contexts, AI revealed itself also as a medium through which the practitioners could appreciate the full potential of learners and use their insights to tailor their own practices and support mechanisms for the learners. In ECHOS, the use of AI environment allowed them to see children behave in ways in which they have not been observed to behave in other contexts, such as classroom, for example. It allowed them to see, these are some specific examples of how the perception of the teachers has changed with respect to particular children. For example, it allowed them to see that some children had specific communication difficulties, and for instance, one child had difficulties with transitioning to different activities, and also difficulties in communicating that they wanted to transition. But as they used ECHOS, they developed both the confidence and also the strategies mainly through imitating the strategies that the agent used to communicate transition between activities, to communicate it to the practitioners. And in the words of one teacher, they said that they were able to identify the signs that the child was giving them, and then to support this child outside the classroom, which was very important for continuing to support this child's confidence building. Another child was observed to react well to particular types of praise from the agent, which gave him the confidence to communicate. And this was actually extended to the classroom once the teachers realized what worked with this child in this respect. Other children began to communicate with the agent. Again, I want to remind you that we were working with very low-functioning children, many of whom were non-communicative. So actually to observe children wanting to communicate and making communicative acts was quite revelatory to the practitioners. Other children who did not normally collaborate before the use of echoes began to do so outside of the echoes environment, to the amazement of the teachers. There were a couple of activities which involved, for example, throwing a bouncy ball through a cloud. It was a magic garden, and this activity was taken by some of the children to the playground, for example, to play basketball together. So these were quite important outcomes, albeit anecdotal, for the schools and for the individual children. In the words of one head teacher, echoes had a really big impact on children. It enabled them to communicate and succeed without any barriers or feeling constrained by everyday teaching. And for teachers, it also provided a window onto what the children were capable of. And he said it was absolutely fascinating to see what the children were capable of. In the context of TARDIS, the practitioners were also given a window onto their learners' strengths and weaknesses, providing them with very concrete data to prompt their discussions with the young people. What was more revealing in this context was the impact that access to such data had on their own support practices, and how they began to question what they pay attention to when assessing the quality of job interviews, and how they explain to the learners what works and what does not. What's more, in the context of AI acting as a medium, the TARDIS tools offered a space for the young people to open up to the practitioners. It allowed them to identify their own strengths and weaknesses and to devise their strategies for addressing them. So in this sense, TARDIS provided a really powerful medium through concrete data, which somehow also made it a little bit less personal and therefore easier for many learners to take a step back and appraise themselves and share it with their practitioners so that they could actually also provide appropriate support. And so I hope I have given you at least a little glimpse of the opportunities for social inclusion that AI may offer. And no doubt the future holds further opportunities for developing and extending these approaches. For example, as the advances in machine learning are being made, such as, for example, in generative modeling techniques, and as AI agent technology improves and becomes less clunky, one possible extension would be to use AI for generating immersive what-if scenarios for the users to allow them to imagine the possible future outcomes. Such applications could be very useful in contexts such as described in this presentation, but also more broadly for well-being and mental health interventions where behavior change is critical. And they could help people envisage in a concrete way how changing a specific behavior or attitude might change a situation and their future prospects. A broader use of AI as a mirror, for example, as part of building would be as part of building environments in schools. It could be used as to create ambient spaces which habitually allow all kids to self-reflect in personalized ways, and also to record those reflections for themselves or to share with others to allow them access to their experiences. Of course, there are quite substantial challenges involved here which relate to data privacy and ownership, but it could provide these kind of built-in environments, and this kind of continuous recording and self-reflection could, first of all, provide a space within which these difficult higher order thinking skills involved in self-reflection and self-regulation could be practiced, and where children and learners could get habituated to them. But they also could provide a way of assessing oneself across time, past and also present, especially if it were combined with these kind of what-if immersive environments. Whatever may be possible technologically, the future of AI in the context of inclusion crucially depends on the involvement of all stakeholders. And this is very clear from the work that I have presented here. And these stakeholders must include learners, teachers, and other educational practitioners as relevant, as well as parents, to provide between contexts insights into how we should be building AI for inclusion and how we should be actually implementing that, those applications in real world context to that put the human at the center. So to conclude, can AI help us create more inclusive society and education? I believe it can, and I hope I convinced you to, although I open this question to you now. But before I finish, I just want to say that in order for this to happen, in order for AI to help us create more inclusive society and education, I also believe that we need to be very clear about the difference between AI and us. And we also need to appreciate that AI can't in itself offer us a solution to the challenge of inclusion. Instead, it can offer the advantage of a very concrete philosophical framework and computational instruments which operate in but don't necessarily impact on the real world, which is an important consideration, which we can think with and explore with the question of what it means to be inclusive and how to best achieve inclusion in different contexts. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kaśka. Do we have any questions? Okay, I have one question. So, common use of AI in education these days is in personalization, to personalize the instruction, typically based on the knowledge and skills of the learner. And, in your consideration of issues of diversity and inclusion, I'm wondering what your thoughts are of how we should think about personalization as a way of addressing issues in diversity and inclusion, and how AI might play a role in that.
So I see personalization in the context of inclusion, especially, actually in education as well, as something that really requires learners' own engagement in the negotiation of what they really need. So I see, I see actually the open learner models as, for example, we used in TARDIS, and as you know, there are many different types of open learner models, as one of the most powerful tools for personalizing the experience of learners and of users of AI. Obviously, it depends on the exact purpose of an AI application, but certainly in educational contexts, to my mind, this is the most important aspect or affordance that AI offers us, because it can provide accurate assessments, and it can, but even if it doesn't, it can serve as a provocation to the learners. Of course, this is a different view of personalization than I think you suggested, which involves assessing or modeling the user and then driving the interaction with the system, which can also be is very useful, as was demonstrated actually through the examples that I used, because obviously we use these models to drive the actions of the agents. But these contexts are very difficult. I mean, especially if we're talking about autism, they are very difficult to do personalization well, because of the really quite substantial differences between the individuals. So that's why there needs to be in my experience, at least in these contexts, there needs to be personalization has to be done in a way where there is a comeback from the learner or from the human. I don't know whether this answers your question, but
it certainly does. Yes, thank you. We've got a question from the audience. They're interested in knowing, do the systems that you've been developing, do they have a means of measuring or assessing their confidence in their own interpretation of the learner's intentions? And I'll add to that, what are there potential negative consequences of misinterpretation of a learner's intentions in this context?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So in principle, yes. Especially in we didn't do this in the ECHOS project because there was always a human presence during the interaction, and I mean the context was quite different. I mean the children were very young, 4 to 7 or equivalent age, and they were non-verbal, so there was actually a need for human support. But in TARDIS, yes, the interpretations of confidence are possible, and we have attempted to do this. One difficulty that we did find was that the job interview contexts are quite contrived, and at present, or at the time when we were developing this technology, the inputs that we could get, the information that we could get was quite limited. I mean, most of the information came from, so it was very difficult basically to interpret the behaviors. With more data, this could be improved. So this capability was quite limited, or is quite limited at present in TARDIS. Now, in terms of the impact, the potential impact on the learner, this is precisely where I think the open learner models play or can play a really crucial role, because they even if the interpretation is wrong, they allow the learner to come back at the system. And there are some, we didn't employ it in TARDIS, but there are some examples of learner models which are negotiable, which explicitly encourage challenges from the learners. And this is where learning actually happens, in this negotiation, in the disagreements that may occur between the learner and the system. And what we did observe on TARDIS, I mean, we were dealing with we were working with real young people who are for real at risk of exclusion through unemployment and other difficulties. In some cases, we were actually also there was a group of learners who were already actually excluded quite severely from society. So we were dealing with young people who were fundamentally lacking in confidence, and you might it might be obvious to conclude that being told that they are wrong or that their behaviors are not what is expected in this context might actually lead to further denting their confidence. But we didn't observe that, and actually our results show that, to the contrary, being put in these situated experiences, being given an opportunity to engage in a job interview, and then being given an opportunity to reflect on it and to discuss it with a human, with very concrete data in front of them, changed the conversation. As I said, it made it, as I said during the presentation, it made it a bit less personal somehow. And as we saw from the self-reports, it also made them less anxious. It made them feel that they can actually engage in these kinds of situations. And it gave them the tools to think about the quality of their performance without feeling that they are somehow being judged. And that was probably for us, that was a huge result.
That's great. I'm afraid we are now out of time, so we'll have to bring this session to a close. Thanks again, Kaśka, for a very insightful presentation. I thank all the other participants. And we will be, just one final item, Kaśka. We have an opportunity to post videos of some of your interactions. Let me know if that's something you're interested in.
Sure.
Okay, very good. All right, thank you, everybody. Our next webinar in this series is going to be presented by Kurt Van Lane from Arizona State University. That'll be in October 3rd and 4th. I think that should be a very interesting presentation, and I encourage you all to attend. So thank you, everybody, and we're signing out now.